How are you doing, sir? Would you like another drink?
Nope.
Big Mac used the quick falling then rising nope that meant, "No, but I sure do appreciate the thought." The waiter did not seem to understand. His lips stayed pressed together, his nostrils pinched, and his eyelids drooped. So Big Mac smiled and added,
Thanks.
The waiter moved on to the next table and began wiping it clear of the fine red dust that kept drifting off the clay street. Big Mac looked out over the pine-green picket fence around the dining area, a low, silly thing that could not have kept a pig in, and his ears tilted forward as he squinted down past the 2-story storefronts lining the street toward the great spreading lone wolf oak at its far end. The waiter sure was considerate. He'd stopped by 4 times over the past hour to see whether the big red stallion might have changed his mind. Big Mac sighed. Twilight would not forget about him. She'd have his name on some checklist. But she was a busy mare. Something must have come up. He'd heard that they used linseed oil to make their coats shiny back in Canterlot, so he'd rubbed some over his fur to make it especially shiny. Now the dust clung to the oil like red soot, and all the patches he had not been able to reach stood out, solitary spots of cleanliness that somehow only made the rest look dirtier. He thought maybe he ought to move inside, in case some pony noticed him sitting there so long, not working. It was a thing some ponies did, he knew. Not work. It gave him a guilty thrill, like the time when Brayburn, just a colt himself, had gotten him down into the cellar where the hard cider was, and challenged him to a drinking contest. But he did not want to take his eyes off the street. She always made him feel like he was standing still, watching her gallop by, and he only had a moment to lasso her before she'd be out of sight. When you roped something, only one of 2 things could happen. You stopped it, or you didn't. Big Mac didn't believe he could stop Twilight even if he'd wanted to. If his rope took hold, she'd drag him along behind her, away from the farm and kin, him just hanging on. Maybe today. Maybe from today he'd never buck another apple tree. He would never turn Twilight into a farmer's wife. Never. No how. Just being here meant he was ready to say goodbye to all that. Anything less, and he'd just be messing with her. He tried to imagine a future of not apple bucking, without colour or form.
Are you sure you don't want anything, sir?
Big Mac looked over at the waiter.
Nope.
He nodded at the pony to make his appreciation clear.
There's a library at the other end of the street, which I find useful when in a meditative mood.
The waiter raised one eyebrow slightly.
No, that wouldn't work at all.
The waiter nodded curtly and moved on. The street was lined with the shops and homes of ponies who did not buck apples. The thought of being one of them, a Big Mac who did not buck apples, made him nervous and a little giddy. He saw himself walking the streets of Canterlot, not pausing to look up at the towers, but moving at a trot, keeping his head down and avoiding eye contact like Canterlot folk did, some of that slick stuff in his mane. He shook his head clear, realized he was breathing heavy. Canterlot was a big city. It must have work for a big pony. There was the guard, of course. What they did was the opposite of working. Stand in one place and don't move. Just frown and look straight ahead, like you not moving is more important than anything any pony else is doing. Big Mac shuddered. Did they all have some kind of guard cutie marks? Or were there some carrots and cherries hiding under that armour? You couldn't tell, which maybe was the point of it. Anyway, he had never seen a red guard, nor an earth pony guard. White and grey, blue manes, probably born to it. There was always lifting and hauling. Ponies needed that everywhere. But it wouldn't do. I'm advisor to Princess Celestia, and this is my husband, the ditch digger. Big Mac was pretty sure no pony had ever said that, ever. He had a deep voice, the deepest in Ponyville. It embarrassed him. But maybe they could use a voice like that in Canterlot, in the operas or whatnot. They'd have some quiet, low notes in the most serious part, where the stage was dark. Notes only he could sing. He'd be standing in the choir, in a fancy black robe maybe, and he'd sing them, and no pony in the audience would be able to tell just whose voice it was, excepting Twilight. A scholar, or mage, or advisor, or whatever it was Celestia was trading Twilight up for, could maybe have a singer for a mate. It wasn't too big of a gap, maybe. But watching the scene in his mind, he realized he hated the big red stallion in the fancy black robe. He wasn't Big Mac at all, just some pony who looked like him, some pony who had stolen his body, his memories, his mare. The stallion turned his head slowly toward Big Mac, smiled a shiny-toothed smile, and mouthed the words,
Apple Bucker.
Apple what?
some pony nearby asked.
What?
Big Mac snorted in surprise and realized the waiter was hovering by him again.
We have apple juice, apple cider, apple martinis, apple Jack Daniels, Ray Bourbon, apple-flavored shots and cocktails, apple wine and champagne. Furthermore, we have apple fritters, apple cake, apple sticks, fried apples, apple salad and apples.
Big Mac shifted a little to get back into the shade of the table's umbrella.
Apple cider.
He was still pretty sure Brayburn had cheated somehow. The waiter did not seem to have heard him. He was looking past Big Mac, off down the street. The water in the flower vase lurched, and Big Mac felt the ground rumble. He turned and looked. There was a cloud of dust and a herd of ponies, with Twilight and her 5 friends at its head, coming this way. They were smiling, with an odd bounce that made their steps look like dancing. She was looking at everything and every pony with eyes as bright and wide as those of a foal seeing its first snow. She looked at everything and every pony that way, in case she missed something last time. She knew everything, down to its inner workings, and somehow that made it all the more magical and mysterious for her than it was for the ponies who gaped in awe, or the ones who'd learned a thing's name and then think they knew it. Knowing the necessity of every little detail and the bigness of them all together. It began to rub off on Mac, as it always did when she was around. He became aware of the Ponyville smell of sawdust and bread, the flour in the waiter's vest pocket, and how the sun scorched a shining white line down Flat Top's barber pole as it spun. He was just going to stand and watch her gallop by, but when she saw Big Mac, her eyes lit up, and she rushed over and pushed her head across the little fence.
Oh, Big Mac, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I forgot, but you won't believe what happened today. I was working on a spell and it went all wrong, but then it all worked out because...
Big Mac tried to keep his eyes on her face, but they kept drifting back to...
I'm sorry, listen to me going on about myself. What did you want to talk to me about?
Big Mac looked down at the table, and then back up at Twilight.
You got wings.
Oh!
Twilight said, as if just remembering them. She flapped them once, slowly, and blushed.
Do you like them?
They're real purty.
Princess Celestia says I'm a princess now. Can you imagine that? Me, a princess?
She leaned forward to look into his eyes, then looked down shyly.
Huh.
Her friends swept her away, still dancing, his sister among them.
Huh.
Big Mac said again, as she galloped away and disappeared. He said it again that evening over supper. Applejack lifted her muzzle from the plate.
Feeling talkative, are we?
Twilight's an alicorn.
That she is. Pass the taters.
And a princess.
That too.
But she's still Twilight.
Of course she is.
Big Mac frowned, turning these facts over in his mind, looking for some angle at which they'd fit together.
Maybe she was always a princess and didn't know it.
I guess that stands to reason. Being as things are what they are, you can't plant pine cones and get apples.
He said nothing else, so she dipped into the steamed thistles and carrots again. The farmhouse was unusually quiet. Applebloom had wolfed down her food and rushed off to meet her friends to prepare an ominous-sounding special surprise for the new princess.
Sis, what am I?
Applejack raised an eyebrow.
Pretty sure you're a pony.
Every pony's a pony.
Well, I reckon you're also an apple farmer.
Is that what I am?
Big Mac stared past her, out the window, off toward where the summer orchard was.
Do you plant apple trees?
Yup.
He used the slow rising yup that meant, where is this leading?
Do you take care of them trees as they grow?
Yup.
This time, the quick rising yup that meant go on.
And do you gather in the apples and stack the baskets in the barn and take some off to market, some to the cider press, and pack some into barrels to ship to Counterlot?
Yup.
He used the quiet falling yup that meant, I see where you're going, and you might be right, but I don't have to like it.
And do you got one half of a bright green apple plastered across each side of your big red behind?
He looked back down at his flank.
Yup.
The flat, harsh yup that meant that's a fact, and no denying it.
Well then, I guess you're an apple farmer.
I guess.
He kept staring off into the distance.
But what if there were no apples?
Don't talk nonsense. As long as there's apples, there'll be apples. And as long as there's apples, there'll be apples.
That's true.
And you're my big brother.
That's good.
Sometimes I wonder what's rattling around in that big old head of yours, Mac.
Yup.
The soft, breathy yup that even he didn't know the meaning of. They cleaned up together, her washing and him drying, then went up early to their separate bedrooms. They had 20 barrels to pack and haul to the station before the afternoon train left for Canterlot next day. As Big Mac drifted off to sleep, he thought of all the bushel baskets of apples stacked and shelved up to the barn's rafters, waiting for him. It was a lot of apples. He wondered, half into the dream world, what he would do if they turned on him, packed him into a barrel and rolled him down to the cider press. Then he felt the soft black curtain of darkness over him, and the wood staves squeezing his shoulders together, and realized it was too late. They already had. He smelled their sharp, tangy breath all around him, and heard prayers murmured for him by 1,000 trembling leaves. He was their slave and their god, and they poured him out into the cider press barrel, not roughly, but reverentially. The barrel's oaken slats were stained with the juice of 1,000 apples. He poured in smooth and filled it snug and tight. Then the big screw pressed down on him from above, and he was flowing out between the slats. They caught everything dull and dirty, so that only what was sweet and strong ran through the gaps, down the trough, and spilled into another barrel. The apples sealed it, bunged it, and shipped it off to the palace. where a purple princess on a throne of gilt-edged books sipped the fresh cider from a silver goblet and smiled.